Well, just want to say thank you very much to AngelMD, Tobin, Dan, and everybody involved with this for putting together such a dynamic group of both speakers and the audience. It's been a really interesting morning, and I hope that we can add to that. I have 20 minutes to speak to you today, so I'm assuming this is my clicker here. So I wanted to kind of be very focused for this audience. The three lenses I want to look through, and if you want to be interactive, I always encourage it, are one, early stage. So whether it's investment or technology development, early stage is a bit of an enigma, and it's something that's been drained a little bit. Connect and just get to know you guys a little bit, and hopefully by doing that, we can all have a future together. And so I'm just going to share a little bit about myself. And I tell I actually had this conversation with my 5-year-old last night, that every day you should try to do two things. You should try to educate yourself, and you should try to make connections, because that's really what life is. And that's what I think AngelMD is, right? It's a form for education and connection. And this is somewhat anecdotal, but I think it's an understatement. 75% of investments, especially into early stage investments, are made through what? Through teams, through technologies, tech transfer, universities. What are you guys seeing? What's the number one thing that most people invest off of? Relationships, right? Oh, hey, I got a guy that's really smart. I knew him from my last company, right? Or I know this gal, she's a brilliant PhD, and I think she's onto something. 75%, I tell you, I think I'm undercutting that. So on top of that, a social economist once told me, if you can learn 3 genuine things about a person, there's a statistically significant chance you will interact with that person at some time in your life. So here are my 3 genuine things, and I hope that all of us have a chance in some way or another to interact, to better understand early stage. So the first one is a growing yet infallible appetite for failure. So every great success that I've had has been predicated by multiple failures. And as a physician, we're taught not to fail. We're taught that failure is the worst, right? Failure means you can't be a dermatologist. Failure means you can't be an orthopedic surgeon. And I think it now means you can't be an anesthesiologist, which is pretty cool. But that is the exact opposite mentality that you need to have going into investment and or development of these. You have to fail through every single mechanism possible to understand what success looks like. And so this picture, it was one of my favorite days in my life. This was with Avenger. Actually, you've heard a little bit about Avenger today. And we got to this point where we were launching our clinical trial. And this was a massive undertaking, massive clinical trial with a revolutionary catheter. And we had all the bright minds in the room, right? Every single top vascular physician that, if they say yay or nay, really drives the market and adoption of this technology. And as we were getting around, and we had human cadaver legs, we had C-arms, we had all of our OCT imaging, we were in this beautiful facility, everybody had flown in, we'd done this great didactic, and we're getting ready to put the catheters in the body and show everybody, right? And everybody's huddled around, spotlights on, it's kind of hot, and the catheter fails, right? But thankfully, we dealt with failed catheters before hundreds of times. So rather than say, holy crap, we have a failed catheter, this is going to be a complete misery, we pulled it out, we said, oh, we forgot to show you the coolest part about the catheter, and we held it up to them as we were swapping out the back catheter, and as everybody's looking at it like this, it's like Billy Cone's magic tricks, right? Everyone's looking over here, and then finally, when you come back over here, boom, you have this beautiful catheter image, and we blew it away. We knocked it out of the park, and subsequently enrolled one of the fastest and most successful from a safety and efficacy trial in the world. And so, had I approached that without having had sort of the tutelage and the mentorship coming through and failing as many times as possible in the wet lab and in every other prototyping, we would have not have come out as successful from that day as we had. So an indelible appetite for failure is something you have to, for sure, to invest in this business and also to be early alongside the technology. The second one is human betterment. And so this is something that I did recently. And it came at a point in my life where I kind of realized, man, I've been doing the same thing for 10 years. I've been doing the same, like 4 minutes of plank, some sit-ups, go for a swim, but I have been evolving as a person. And so I had to think about it. Now I have 3 kids, I'm traveling all the time. How do I just spend a few days to better myself? And so, believe it or not, I actually found the time to take 3 days away from work, from kids, from family, got to go with a dear friend of mine, and we showed up to this thing with Laird Hamilton. I don't know if you guys know who Laird Hamilton is, but he is a beast. And Laird Hamilton has surfed the biggest waves in the world. He has constantly redefined what is imaginable. And he's married to Gabby Reese, who's a professional volleyball player. And the two of them put this clinic on. And it's about doing everything you do, but underwater. and essentially holding your breath to do it. So I swim, I work out, I do all these things. So they're like, yeah, let's just do all of our weight workouts underwater. And I kid you not, within the first 45 minutes, we're sitting on this pool deck, we're laying down, we're on these mats, and we're doing these breathing exercises. I've swam my entire life, played water polo. I've never held my breath for more than a minute, and I've tried. And we're doing these breathing exercises, and we're getting in our zone, and I'm focusing on my third eye. And all of a sudden, he says, okay, now go ahead, now all you have to do is just hold. And he's kind of talking us through this, and I feel good, we're on this ethereal layer, and all of a sudden he goes, okay, you're now approaching 3 minutes. If you want to start exhaling, feel free to do that. If not, go ahead and continue to hold your breath. And meanwhile, I'm like, holy crap, I just held my breath for 3 minutes, but I'm trying to keep cool because I want to go more than 3 minutes. But it was a reminder to me in the first 45 minutes of this 3-day excursion that I just broke a bound I'd never even thought possible before. And so for the next 2.5 days, we continue to do this. And now I don't get to do this every day, but every day I do some small part of this, whether it's breathing on an airplane or when I wake up in the morning, I focus a little bit. So don't forget yourself in this, because it's probably one of the most critical elements of anything we do, and we neglect it. It's the first thing as physicians. If you're sick, you show up to work, right? You get no sleep, you eat like crap. It's just all these things. Don't forget yourself. And the last one for me is I have a higher calling. So every day, I'm either on the phone or FaceTime or home with this circus of my family. And I think it's important for people around you to know that you bring your energy back to your family, right? Whether it's good or bad, they feel it. They're a sponge for you, and they're going to be reflective of the same nature. So I have 3 kids under 5 who are hilarious, and my wife is way smarter than me. But these are my 3 genuine points. So I'm just hoping if at any point we can connect, that you can use these and we can make something meaningful together moving forward. I would be remiss if on this day in this room I didn't talk to you about sort of mentorship. So for me, mentorship has been everything, and I happen to have 2 of my biggest, if not the biggest mentors in my life in the room on the same time. I remember looking at the agenda and being like, holy, I can't believe this, that both Billy and John are on this agenda together. So John Simpson and Billy Cohn, I have had the fortune, there's no sort of script that I wrote to get in front of these 2 individuals. It was serendipitous at both points, but I knew these are things in the first 10 seconds that you really want to work with these people, and you just latch on, seriously. I think at both points, John was kind of like, why are you still here? And Billy at the same time is like, hey, who are you again? So once you find the right people, latch on and just try to learn as much from them as you can, because if you're not constantly surrounding yourself by people way smarter than you, you're just not trying hard enough. So thank you very much to both John and Billy, because it's a phenomenal thing you've given me. So I just want to take 2 seconds for you to focus on this slide, that the pace of change will never be as slow as it is today. And this is a critical thought process for early companies and early investors. Literally, between today and tomorrow, millions of people will join the internet. I'm still not on Instagram yet, which I get a lot of flack for, but probably by tomorrow I will be. And so you just can't underestimate the power of this and how different it is now than it was 10 years ago. And this leads to my favorite slide in all of innovation, all of investing, is how you have to understand when to bring a product to market. And we're having a conversation earlier is that, in early stage investing, people are always talking about the science and they're always talking about everything else. But, how often are you thinking about how well your commercial product is going to do in the marketplace? And the one thing I will say is that it's not the wheelhouse of a lot of early stage scientists or inventors, and it probably shouldn't be. You should probably really be working on getting everything nailed down to your product. You should be relying on other people to help you understand this, but you can't neglect it. The wrong thing is to neglect it. And so I want to look at the value as the number one takeaway here for you. And this is the difference between a differentiated product and market expectations. And market expectations are always getting harder, right? People always want more, they want it faster, they want it cheaper, they want it better, they want it quicker. And if your product is at that point, from day one, the decay of your product starts. And so if you're not constantly thinking about how the market is evolving as you're building your product, or as an investor supporting that company to get there, then you're behind the game. And I'll give you a real world example of this, which is phenomenal to me. Hepatitis C, right? So 10 years ago, hepatitis C, we didn't think it could be curable, right? We are almost at a cure for hepatitis C. It's a cocktail of medications. And at J&J, we basically got to a point where we could cure 99% of hepatitis C. The current cure rate is in the low to mid 90s, which is cool, but 99% is way better. But at that point, several competitors had gained advantage in investing in some commodity products that they were able to bring to the cocktail that dropped the price dramatically to where we could never actually foundationally get a program off the ground to get to that 99%. And so I think very fortuitously, some of R&D later said, well, we can't do it, so let's not just keep our heads in the sand and move forward with this product and bring it to market and fail. Let's figure out better ways in the future, scrap it now, and see if we can get to 99% in a different way. So you have to think about failure at the right time is a good thing for investing. These are some dynamics I just want to focus on. So not obvious if I don't have labels on these, but something that's moving forward, right? So something to an investor or something to physicians in the audience. So 2012, 2016, and then just focusing in on, this is essentially the hospital-owned physician groups, right? So physicians, and I think this is a lot of early innovators that were physicians, got to dominate what was being purchased in hospitals, what technologies we could try, how technology was getting brought to patients. That is not the case anymore, right? The conversation has gone from the physician saying, I'm just gonna take my patient somewhere else, to the physician in a service line saying, okay, we'll own this, to now the CFO and large purchasing groups saying, well, we want the cheapest yet most evidence-based product out there, which is like sort of an enigma in itself. But that's how people are purchasing now. So that's market expectations, and you have to be very cognizant of that. And so this shifts essentially how you bring data to market, right? It used to just be clinical outcomes and new tech, and everyone would buy it regardless of the price. Then it was, well, can you make my patient growth or profitable services? Now it's how are you gonna increase my contribution margins and cost reductions? So you have to understand as you're developing data for these things that you have to speak to all of these. And I put this up here, not to harp on anybody, and I feel as a faculty member at Stanford I can do this, but this blew my mind. And so this came out, and this was a communication from the new president at Stanford Healthcare, and essentially said, I just want to thank everybody, for this massive thing that we reduced our ongoing operating expenses. Like, when did the messaging from Stanford go from best-in-class service for patients and the most prolific healthcare system on the world to great job, everyone, we brought down operating costs, right? It shows you what's important, and if everybody here is driving the innovation sort of agenda, we're missing out. So it's up to us, and it's up to you to drive the innovation agenda, hence optimism. Stay really encouraged by what's going on. So I want to give you some examples that we can all get behind. Fred Moll, I think a lot of people in this audience probably know Fred or have heard of him. The public has no idea to the extent of difference between top surgeons and bad ones. Robots are good at getting where they are supposed to, remembering where they are, and stopping when required, right? So who thought robots would be, outside of Star Trek, would be such a big deal in surgery? Well, Fred obviously did a long time ago, and he thought because of this. And I remember this in med school, the first day of med school, they said, the great part about going to med school and finishing is that, everybody in med school is aiming for the top quartile of the normal distribution curve, right? Everyone wants to be the top of their class. But he said, I know there's a couple of you out there, I don't know who you are yet, but I will, that are gonna be in the bottom quartile. But he said, you know what's cool for you? You too are also gonna be a doctor, right? So I think this is the reality, is that not all doctors are created equally, right? That's not a good thing or a bad thing, but that there are different skill sets. So it's the great democratization of how do we make sure that everybody is getting the best service possible, and thinking about robots as a case. So cheaper, faster, better, right? This is the mantra that every investor or CFO or hospital wants to do. So cheaper. They went through and they did all these things and they said, okay, well, robots actually cost more. And so let's think about it in a different gynecological surgeries. Like, well, they also cost more in these surgeries, so not cheaper. And then they said, okay, well, we're faster for sure. And then they published some endoscopic surgeries. Actually, you're about an hour and 10 minutes longer. And they said, okay, so we're not faster. Well, for sure, we're better, right? For sure. And they said, actually, well, if you look at outcomes, there's no significant difference in what's going on. And so they said, okay, we're not better. And so, okay, so this is, I want you to think about this. This is where you can compare the evolution of medical devices to the platypus. Who has seen a platypus in real life? Okay, right? A couple people. Now, platypuses are a little interesting, right? So they have the tail of a beaver, they have the beak of a duck, they have webbed feet, and they're kind of like an evolutionary mystery. But they're wicked fast underwater, and they're one of the most toxic animals, and they can hunt, and they're predators. But they just never had a good marketing campaign. So they're not in zoos, right? You don't see them, you're not hanging out. They're not in your home, you're not showing off your platypus. But they're out there, right? So the robot could have been a platypus. It was very close to being a platypus. But this came out, and this was from one of the analysts in North Capital. Our extensive field checks highlighted a story where aggressive marketing drives the message and true clinical utility seems secondary in nature, which is mind-blowing, but this is reality, right? So what happened? They started putting up billboards, transforming lives. Ladies, we're on your team. I'm famous. You should come use my robot, right? And this worked. This worked, right? And people said, okay, well, it's not faster, it's not cheaper, it's not better, but we want to use it. And so they started looking at this, and it was a $4 billion market in 2015, the 20% CAGR over the next 8 years, and I can tell you it's only going to be bigger. The crazy fact, if you were an early investor in this company, or if you were looking at the early part of this company and you had cold feet, 75% of the early intuitive workforce had turned over by 2014, 75%. So failures, there's a lot of failures that went into this. Even crazier fact, Fred Moll had already started 3 new robotics companies by 2014, having left Intuitive in 2002. And I can tell you what Fred's doing is gonna probably maybe eclipse what Intuitive's doing. And so I just want, you got to look at the first or the second half of the story. So the market cap of Intuitive is only half the story. It was founded in 1995, right? So it took 10 years of technological adoption. Healthcare investors have to have patience, and they have to be able to ride the wave of the downs to get to the ups. But you need advice, and you need to know how to get there. And then in 20 years, it's going to take market saturation, right? This isn't investing, in a picture that dissolves after 10 seconds that you can text to somebody. It's investing in real solutions for healthcare. And now it's like you can't get away from an Intuitive. In one market, they have 14 different robots, and they're all across the street from each other. So business realities rotate, and you have to be aware of this. And so through corporate strategic partnering, I just want to give you an early entree into a toolbox you can use. And it's no longer a scary toolbox. We're not coming after your IP. We're not trying to strong arm you. We literally need you. The big, large corporates need everybody in the external communities to service their pipeline. They can't do it themselves, and they don't have the wherewithal to do it. But we also are evolving. So I like to take the example of Medtronic. Medtronic was dominating a lot of the early cath lab procedures, in large part to many of the things that they acquired through Dr. John Simpson. But then they keenly realized that there's a lot going on there that are driving down market pressures and understanding the cost infrastructures. And so they said, hey, not only are we going to sell you a lot of stuff, but we're going to come in and run all of it for you. We're going to run your cath lab. We're going to make you efficient. We're going to streamline your services and products. And the hospitals were more than willing to say, whew, thanks, we'll go ahead and do that. Now, Medtronic's in a really good position to be able to sit there and pick what they want to based on this. I'm not sure that's going to be sustainable for the long run, but it's an evolution that's actually served them very well. And you see all of these businesses, you hear the largest taxi cab company in the world doesn't own any taxis, the largest hotel company in the world doesn't own any hotels. These are things that impact healthcare as well. And so J&J, a while ago, 8 years ago, said, man, we have this global organization, it's massive. How do we help people? How do we use all of this all over the world, all these things we do and help people? And so we put together a toolbox. And I'm happy, I'd like to speak outside of this with people, but we represent JLABS, which is an incubator. It's literally to get companies through the first 2 to 3 years of the valley of death. And I think investors are starting to see the tremendous value in this. And the one thing that I think is most valuable is no strings attached, in the sense that there is no capped upside. So you can come in, and the best teams in the world never want a capped upside, investors or entrepreneurs. And so if you come in, you only get services and benefits. You get to use what and how much you want. Now you have to be good. You have to pass a pretty rigorous selection committee, but you get the exposure to all of this. You get to use it, consume it, make sure they're looking at all of these changing dynamics while you're focusing on the product, and then you guys can mature together. And so through a lot of other JJDC, our corporate venture arm, our innovation centers, we put together this massive toolbox where we can research, collaborate, we can license, we can buy, we can invest, all of these things that never were an offering 8 years ago when J&J said we could just do everything ourselves. That is no longer the case. There is an entire optimism within J&J on how do we make earlier, smaller, more hands-off bets just to help people get to the point where they can actually offer a product that we want to buy or get to. So I'm going to spend the next 2 minutes or maybe 1 minute just talking about, so what's come of this? What's actually come in the last 5 years, okay? 5 years ago, we opened up these incubators. We started dropping them around North America. We just announced one in China that will be opening up next year. And we said, what if we just let people come here and benefit from our expertise? and see how that progresses. So after 5 years, we took a look, and I'm happy to say now we have 330 companies, just two months after we published this report. But we think that's a pretty strong number of companies coming across our desk. And I would say this is about a fifth of all companies that actually apply to us. So there's a screen. And they come from all over the world, right? They want to come to areas where there are investors co-located with area expertise, co-located with a market that is willing to accept their technology. So what does that afford us? It affords us the ability to do things J&J has never done. So WhoBox, there's a pretty big Houston crew here, right? Which is amazing. I think Houston is going to be, if not already, the powerhouse of medical devices in the future. WhoBox is from a little town north of Sao Paulo in Brazil. And J&J got together with 100 open startups and just asked, how are we going to help the aging population? Simple question. How are we going to help the aging population? And WhoBox, PhD, in a lab, said, okay, I've been working on this really cool technology where I can actually tell people to move their face, and I've overlaid a software, and I can move an entire wheelchair like that. So you don't have to move anything, you don't have to touch, you don't have to speak, you can just do, you can look left, you can look right, you can raise your eyebrows, you can smile, and everything moves together. And it blew everyone away, right? WhoBox would never have gotten in front of J&J. They would have never had the connection, right? None of the three sort of genuine relationships with anybody to get that, but they showed up, which is the number one thing that you have to do as an early stage, is just show up. So they showed up, they won this award, and they now have migrated from Sao Paulo to the Texas Medical Center and to JLABS at Houston. And now they have the entree to both J&J and all of the facilities in the Texas Medical Center to advance their technology, which is astronomical if you think about that access. We have brought together a tremendous amount of people, right? So we're really focused on the network. So 848 networking events, 33 different cities around the world, 500,000 people show up, 1,260 investor meetings with our companies. Companies just don't get this kind of access. And this isn't just like, hey, you're an investor, you're a company. This is, hey, you're an investor, you have a tailored thesis, you're looking at this stage, we have a company that fits in that at that stage, why don't you guys get together? And I think it takes that relationships to make that happen. We are really strong in diversity. So we think a diversified portfolio makes a lot of sense. Diversified, investors and early stage startups make a lot of sense too. It's just that many different perceptions on shots on goal. So whereas the industry is less than 1% women-led and 8%, we have a very healthy portfolio of all sorts of folks running companies within JLABS. Typically they start just where every early stage starts, right? 30% with less than $1 million, 45% come in with 1 to 2 people. So on this, I want to focus on one of my favorite companies, and maybe there's a little bit of bias as being an anesthesiologist here. But so David Zapel, the guy in the middle here, is the son of Warren Zapel. And Warren Zapel was one of the early pioneers and founder of nitric oxide. So nitric oxide, it's used essentially in pediatrics, but has been worldwide used for pulmonary hypertension, right? And so nitric oxide, you have to have big trucks that ship in all of this, and it's piped into ORs, and they use it, and it's this massive infrastructure play. And Warren said, that's really cool, but we've been doing that for 10, 15, 20 years. I think there's a better way of doing that. And so they put together this little box, right, this platypus. And they put it together, and they said, what if we could take air, we could bring it in a tube, we could electrically convert it into nitric oxide, and in the same box we could exit it. And that's what they did, which is mind-blowing. So this box right here takes air in and pushes out nitric oxide. And you can wear it around your neck as a necklace and walk around in sub-Saharan Africa and treat kids with pulmonary hypertension. I mean, mind-blowing stuff, right? So that necessarily doesn't get off the ground, but they won an open pitch startup. They went into M2D2, one of our sponsorship labs in Boston, just outside of Boston. And that picture on the right is David Zapel sitting with his box, talking to the worldwide head of research and development for Actelion, which is one of the largest therapeutic makers and inventors of pulmonary hypertension therapies. And so it's just J&J being like, hey, why don't we just put these people together without any vested interest and see where things happen? And I think that's the magic of what we are looking to do. $10 billion has been raised by our companies in 5 years. We think that's pretty impressive. And J&J just naturally, we're not doing it just for complete beneficence. We think that if we get the best people in the area and we just get to work with them, that all of a sudden we'll start to see things earlier than we ever have. And so as a virtue of this, about 20% of the companies we've gone into confidential partnerships with. This is the biggest number. So usually it's a low teens number of companies that are in survival after 5 years. And a heavy portion of our portfolio is therapeutics. Med device and tech and everything are growing, about a third to about half in total. But 80% are alive and thriving and being invested in and hitting milestones. And I think this is just because it's the simple formula of letting a lot of other really smart people just watch out for you while you're sitting there focused on making sure that you're getting these things done, these critical milestones advanced in the 2 to 3 years that make the most sense for you as an inventor and your investors to retain their value so you're not getting drowned out in series D, E, F, right, as you're going along the way. Our companies grow, right? They start out low, they come up high. And just as an example, it's changed J&J. So this isn't going away. I think every strategic is going to have a plan like this. But these are companies literally that came off the street. We brought them in. We just hung out with them. We tried to give them good advice. We thought, wow, this is really interesting. And they're pivotal platforms for J&J now moving forward, right? We're investing a lot of money into them. So with that, I would just like to say thank you very much to AngelMD and everyone here. And I look forward to following up and meeting almost all of you in the room. Thank you very much.